flag of our nation and recognize the principles for which it stands. Department 1 is now in session. The Honorable Mark E. Wendell, Judge, presiding.
Please be seated, everyone. Good morning. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. I'm so excited by my new wireless microphone. We'll eventually figure this out. And, well, we tried for 9:15, not quite, but we'll see what we can do. But we do have Mr. Durst present with his lawyers, with Mr. Milius and Mr. Balian, Mr. Miata, Mr. Henderson, Mr. Lewin, not yet, but you're showing your, we're continuing with the videotaped testimony that we began on Thursday. So, you ready? Both sides ready?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, shall we continue?
Yes, Your Honor. I backed it up about 10 seconds just for everyone to get caught up on. And I'll plus play.
What I wanted to do. And a person in the same role that I was now had really tried to help me. So I was grateful for that advice, and I look forward to doing it. So I met with everybody.
Okay. So you basically you had a good experience with a mentor that you had when you were a medical student, and you decided to give back by doing the same thing and giving individualized attention to each student to try to guide them.
I did, yes, I enjoyed it very much, and I believe the students did too.
Okay, I'm sure they did. I'm sure they appreciated it. How often were these group sessions where you would meet individually? I'm sorry, where you would meet with a group of 6 or 7 students? How often did you do that?
At least twice a year.
And how long was the session?
They were approaching an hour, 45, 15 minutes to an hour.
How about the individual sessions that you would have one-on-one with the students?
Same thing. Sometimes they were shorter, but sometimes they were as long as an hour.
Okay.
And I took detailed notes on all of them, on everything.
So when you met with a student individually, on a one-on-one basis, where would the meeting usually take place?
In the same conference room in the Department of Surgery.
And are you saying that every student you met with, you took notes on your discussions?
I did.
Why?
I'm a colon and rectal surgeon. I'm anal compulsive.
Okay.
I have drawings for my first 5,000 operations.
We don't need to see those.
I have them neatly organized at home.
How good is your memory?
It's it's pretty good.
Okay. Do you remember an individual named Kathleen Durst?
I do.
And how do you remember that name? Who was that individual?
She was a student of mine.
Do you remember Kathleen Durst?
I do.
What can you tell us about her that you remember in terms of, first of all, what she was like generally?
Well, I had, before I spoke to Kathleen Durst, I had spoken to 1,000 students. So I was, I had the expectations for the students. I haven't spoken to was coming up this evening. And it's based on 1,000, seeing 1,000 students. And most of the students are 23, 24, unmarried, unsettled, nervous. They've been in school for 20 years, almost 20 years. They're still children, about to become grown-ups, head out into the world with their you and me. And they were pretty nervous. They were really nervous because they're unsettled. There are 10,000 diseases, and they knew very little about any of the 10,000 diseases, let alone everything about them. And people were going to have to depend on them. But Kathleen Durst was completely different in many ways. She was like no one I had talked to. She was older. She was more mature. She was beautiful. She was poised. She was not a child. She was a woman. And she was also something that I had never seen in anyone before or since. She was terrifying.
We're going to talk about that in a second. Let's make sure we are talking about the same person. I'm showing you what's previously been marked as People's 5. Do you recognize Kathleen?
I do, yes.
Where is she?
She's on the right.
She's on the right. Okay. Does this photograph to you kind of look how she looked when you knew her? Maybe a little older, younger?
Not the same.
Did Kathie ever rotate with you, or she actually performed any surgeries with you?
No.
Okay. When was her rotation through surgery? Do you recall?
I do. It was in February of 1981.
Okay. And you testified you have seems like a pretty good memory of Kathie. And you've given us some reasons of why your memory is so well of her, so good. Do you have, how would you describe your memory of the individual interactions you had with Kathie?
I would say it's good. I remember our meeting.
Okay. And is there a particular reason why this meeting, you have a good memory? Why do you think you remember it after all these years?
Well, it was embedded in my mind because of what subsequently happened to her. But I remember the session without stimulation. I would have remembered even if nothing happened to her. Because she was so different. I'd never spoken to a person in that emotional state before.
Okay, we'll talk about that in a second. This meeting that you're referring to happened in 1981, is that right?
It did.
It's a long time ago. Throughout the past decade, have you kind of forgotten about this meeting, or have you had occasion to think about it repeatedly over and over?
I probably thought of it 1,000 times.
Why?
Because it was an emotional time for her, and I remember it clearly. And I'm aware of what subsequently happened to her, and it just comes to mind all the time.
Do you recall telling myself, Mr. knowing that throughout these decades you felt a lot of guilt?
I do.
Explain what you mean by that, and how it relates to your memories.
I know. You know, I know she's gone. She disappeared, and I wondered whether or not over the years I could have or should have done more to protect her, because she had told me that she thought she was in danger. She had told me she thought that her husband might kill her. And I wonder, now that whether I could have done more to protect her. I'm sure that so many other people do that too. And I knew her for a moment. I can't even imagine the grief that people who knew her as a woman, as a child, as a friend, have gone through.
And all these things you just described, do those play into why you feel you still have such a good memory of these events that happened so many years ago?
Yes.
Tell us about what led to your individual meeting with Kathie Durst in particular, and what you were meeting about.
Well, she wasn't doing well in the clerkship. The residents were telling me that she was absent a lot. And I subsequently got a call from someone, I don't remember exactly who, saying that she was going to come and see me because she was missing a lot of the clerkship, and she was going through a lot of unpleasantness. And I had asked to see her anyway, as I would have normally. And then she subsequently did come in to see me.
And was part of the meeting to discuss with her performance and what was going on and how she could do better?
Yes.
Okay. Did she specifically discuss with you what was interfering with her ability to do well in her clerkship?
She did.
Which is like, to the best of your memory.
That's my memory. Everything just came spilling out before me. She was very emotional. She was shaking. She was not. She said that she was going through divorce, and it was a terrible time. She said that she actually had been interested in surgery, that she ranked it number one. She wanted to do that, but she couldn't because of all the unpleasantness that was going on. There was violence involved, there were court proceedings, and there were lawyers, and there were therapists, and it was, her life was a mess.
Did she tell you who was causing this unpleasantness?
Yes, she said it was her husband. She mentioned that she had been married for 8 years. He was an older person, 10 years older, and that he would laugh. She used a word that I've never heard used before. She said there was a homicidal side to it. And that was shocking to me. The concept that somebody could use that word was embedded. I asked her what she meant by that.
As she was telling you these things, was she still shaking and trembling as you described?
Oh, absolutely.
Did it appear to you she was under an extreme emotional state as she was telling you these things?
Yes.
Do you recall if she was crying?
She wasn't crying. No, she wasn't crying.
Did she tell you that this situation that she was describing, the fear she was expressing, was over or was currently going on in the current time?
Very much going on.
This is, as she expressed to you, as she was trembling, shaking.
Yes.
Did she discuss with you, what did she tell you, to the best of your memory, about why she wasn't doing well in the class, or showing up?
Well, she said she had to go to all these court proceedings, the therapists, the lawyers. It was all something that she had to do. And she mentioned one particular thing that was very...
What was that?
She said that she'd been with a friend and that her husband had come in and he was in a foul mood and he attacked the friend and knocked him to the ground and was kicking him and stepping on his head.
Was this in front of her?
In front of him.
How did she...
She said...
Go ahead. Before you tell me what she said, did she tell you, or did it actually did it appear to you, based on her demeanor, that she was telling you that how this incident that happened to this third party in front of her affected her?
Well, it was terrifying. She was terribly traumatized. She said that she was sure that if she hadn't interfered, he would have killed the person. And to interfere, she threw herself on him. And he was hitting her as well as this other person until he stopped.
Let me ask you, when Kathie was telling you these things, was she asking to get out of work that she had to do in the purchase?
Not at all. She wanted. She said she was. She said she wanted to complete it. It just was a hard time for her. She said she wanted to give 100%. She said she was compulsive and wanted to do well. And certainly responded to it.
She kind of used the same terminology.
Same term that I've used 1,000 times about myself.
Did she ask for any special consideration?
None whatsoever. Not what she wanted. She just wanted. She wanted some. I guess she wanted evidence. She wanted something. And I told her that I was a friend. That nothing. That the surgical torture was unimportant. That she was doing fine. And that the only thing that was important was that she stayed safe.
Did she tell you she would do all the work and make up all the work she had to do?
Yes.
Did she, in fact, make up the work, do what she had to do, and successfully pass that clerkship?
Yes, I subsequently wrote a passing grade for her when passing grade for her and submitted it to the school. I told her that this was a terrible time.
I don't mean to interrupt you, but I want to ask you this question. Based on your interactions with her, based on your interactions with, let me ask you this, how many medical students do you think you encountered, instructed, etc., in rotations throughout the years?
Well, by that time I'd done 1,000 and subsequently I did another 1,000 after that.
So based on your interactions with Kathleen Durst, based on your interactions with thousands of other medical students in her position, in her education, how strongly did Kathie appear to you to want to graduate medical school and actually become a doctor?
She absolutely wanted to do that. I told her that she would make a very fun doctor. It was my experience that people who had tough times or had an operation, they were better because they knew what it was like to be a patient. It's a very bad thing to be a patient. We've all been patients. And when we're patients, we're afraid. And to have a doctor who knows what we're going to do, and that makes the doctor a better doctor. And I knew she would be a very fine doctor.
Aside from the fear, the legal problems, and the other things she told you that were interfering with her ability to perform your profession, did she tell you about whether her husband was taking any other actions to interfere with her ability to graduate?
She did mention that he had cut off her tuition, and that was a problem for her.
These notes you took, did you write them after the session was over, or when did you write them?
I wrote them as we were talking. It was my usual thing to take. When I saw patients, I wrote down what they were saying. I did contemporaneously as they were saying, and I did the same.
Did you say you wrote them contemporaneously while you were meeting with Kathie?
Well, my words and her words went on. Not all of them, but ones that I thought was.
I assume then that the exact details of what she was telling you were fresh in your mind while you were writing them.
Absolutely.
And I assume then that you were truthful in what you wrote?
Yes.
Okay. Today, as you sit here, sounds like you have a pretty good memory, but here's what I'm going to ask you. Do you have a sufficient memory to testify fully and accurately about all the exact details of what Kathleen told you?
Every single detail, no. But overall, yes.
Have you done your best today to tell us what you remember about this conversation? Now, I have a package of notes, and I marked this as People's 64.
Yes.
I'm showing you, I'm going to hand it to you, what has been marked as People's 64. Actually, before I show it to you, do you recall the date of this meeting you had with Kathleen Durst where she expressed this fear and all these other things to you?
I do. It was March 3rd, 1981. And there was a terrible irony involved in it. The terrible irony is that on March 3rd, 1982, the exact day a year later, I spoke to Inspector Struck and Janine and Attorney Janine Bureau's office, telling him that exactly a year before, Kathleen Durst had told me that her husband might kill her.
So this information you had, you gave it to Detective Struck?
I did. When the information about her disappearance came to New York papers, I said, oh my God. And I went out and I found my notes. And I called the district attorney.
Okay. Did you actually speak with Janine Bureau?
No.
Okay.
I didn't know I did.
Okay. And are you sure it was Mike Struck you spoke with, or perhaps another investigator with Janine Bureau, or do you recall it was?
I believe it was Detective Struck.
Okay. I'm handing you what has been marked as People 64. If you can take those and look through them, please. Before I ask this question, the police officer that you spoke to, was this a police officer with the agency of the New York Police Department in the city?
I don't know where he is. I believe he's in Westchester County. but I'm not sure.
I'm going to ask you to go ahead and just read, without giving any commentary, just read your notes into the record. First of all, are these your handwritten notes?
Yes,
And are these the notes you took on March 3rd, 1981?
yes,
And that's your handwriting?
yes.
Please read people's 64.
The first page says Kathleen Durst, Tuesday, March 3rd, 1981. And then it says, in the midst of divorce, not very pleasant, haven't been in, not asking for special consideration, time after the clerkship, court proceeding, have to go, seeing her therapist, appropriate excuse.
And we'll stop you there. Where you wrote appropriate excuse, is that something she said, or is that your question to yourself?
I believe that it's something she said. I question mark after what she said. I hope this is an appropriate excuse.
Go on, please continue.
Page 2 says surgery ranked number 1. Interested in it. Unfortunate time. Court assault proceeding. The weekend before surgery. Very, very difficult. Violence. Feel it at work. I'm anal compulsive. It's important. You know. Give 100%.
Please, you continue.
Page 3 says, due and elected. Looking and going on for a year. Married 8 years, been together 10 years. 29. Mature for my age. No children. Husband very wealthy. Stopping for tuition checks. Tell her about it. We need a good lawyer. Assaulted. Kicked someone in the head. Page 4 says, have a good lawyer. Lingering death. Can't guarantee her safety. Homicidal side to him. Friend is a good word. Never forget. In some ways, look at it with a sense of contentment. Situational therapy. Objective party. Care about you. Will make a damn good. The next page says, husband is 35. Have your back. Glad. Anxious to have you come by. Thank you for taking your teacher's cap off. Well, I care about you. Do come by.
And the last part of these notes that you read, where you're saying, glad you came by, I care about you, etc. Are these things Kathie said, or are these things you said to Kathie that you put on?
These are things that I said to Kathie. I liked her. She was very nice.
Okay. After Kathie finished and successfully passed your rotation, did you ever see or hear from her again?
I never did.
In 1981 to 1982, what were the students' specific daily duties that were going through your rotation? In terms of seeing patients?
They assisted. They didn't see patients individually, but they assisted. They made rounds with the residents to show them how to change dressings and how to take histories as to how the people were doing after operations. But then they went to the operating room, and they were assistants in the operating room.
Did they perform work?
They performed, yes.
Would they have some need to be there to take care of patients, change their dressings, etc.?
Yes, whatever they did meant that somebody else didn't have to do it.
So if somebody didn't show up, would someone else have to do their work?
Yes.
In 1981 or 1982, in your experience being in charge of the surgery rotation for so many years, if you had a medical student
Yeah, what?
A medical student, third year, was assigned to your service, who was going to be ill and miss the first day, the very first day. Would it be your protocol for them to call someone on your service to let them know they weren't going to be there to fulfill their duties? Or to call some dean at the medical school?
It was expected of the students, if they weren't going to be there, to call into the service and say, I'm not going to be there, because there were assignments given out each day.
And based on your experience being the head of major rotations such as surgery at the Montefiore Hospital, would that be expected with every rotation the students will be going through?
Oh, yes, and I would expect them to call in. If they didn't, that would be, that would be wrong.
Okay. And is that your experience based on interacting with all the heads of all the departments?
Yes.
The rotations?
Yeah.
Is it also your experience from going through medical school yourself? Is it also your experience from interacting probably with heads of departments, many other medical schools who have similar programs to yours and comparing notes on how they operate their programs?
Yes.
Given that same scenario, a third-year medical student who's supposed to show up for the first day of their rotation and further assume that they want to graduate, would it be out of the ordinary for such a scenario for them to be ill with something like diarrhea and vomiting, to call a dean at the medical school instead of someone at your facility?
I can't imagine that they would call the dean of the medical school.
If such a student wasn't performing well and was worried about getting in trouble and not graduating, and they were having attendance issues, and they were going to miss the first day of a rotation, who is the last person they would want to call so they wouldn't get in trouble?
The last person would be the dean.
If they had called you or someone in your position, would you expect that they would get reported to the dean for not showing up?
No. Object. Cross-examination. Mr. Lewis, you may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, Doctor.
Good morning.
I just have a few questions for you. I'll endeavor to be brief. If my understanding is correct, you had two conversations on February 19th, 2016 with people led by Mr. Wilk. You recall that?
I'm sorry, say that again?
February 19th of 2016, you were interviewed. You recall that?
I remember that I got a call, yes.
It was two calls. The first call was interrupted because they wanted to transmit these notes that you had just discussed with us, correct?
Yes.
Were you aware that your calls were recorded?
No,
They didn't inform you you were going to be recorded?
I don't recall. They possibly did, but I don't recall that.
You also had a conversation with the people, I believe, when you arrived Monday evening? This
Yes.
Monday?
Yes.
It's fair to say, is it not, Doctor, that both before that call in February of 2016 and subsequently leading up to your appearance here, you have followed aspects of this case, correct?
Yes.
Let's turn to part of your testimony where you discussed some of the reports you were getting about Kathie Durst's performance, her kind of state of being before you met her. You recall that?
Yes.
If I believe I heard you correctly, you learned that she seemed distracted,
Yes.
a little put off.
I know what the word put on things that you call that phrase.
Fair enough. Bring that volume, I believe it's 1, page 9, line 17 to 21. Maybe volume 2, let me check. the screen, I'll ask you to focus on lines 17 through 19.
Yes, okay, I see that.
Put off.
Yes,
She was also described as not completely involved.
yes,
Now, when you met with her in March of 1981, you specifically recalled and have testified that she was shaking.
yes,
Now, as a professor at a prestigious medical school in New York City in the 1980s, you were very familiar with the fact that the well-to-do were pretty involved in the cocaine scene. Is that fair?
I have no experience with the cocaine.
I didn't say you had experience. I said you had familiarity with the fact that
I know that some people took cocaine there.
it was rather prevalent in New York City in the 1980s.
I don't know that, but I don't question it.
Well, you do know, you described an incident with Kathie Durst, her friend, and Robert Durst, correct?
Yes,
She described for you this incident when she was meeting with you, correct?
yes,
In that incident, did she tell you that her and the friend were doing cocaine when Mr. Durst found them?
she did.
Well, Doc, did she mention when she described this incident that this friend, as you called it, and herself had been doing cocaine when Mr. Durst came in?
She did not.
All right. Now, she did mention to you, according to your testimony and your notes, that part of the reason she was struggling to complete this program was court proceedings, right?
Yes,
Those were divorce proceedings specifically, right?
I don't know what she said.
Well, she told you, I'm sorry, you said that she told you that she was going through a divorce, correct?
Yes,
And that was in March of 1981, according to your testimony.
yes.
Well, let's ask it this way, Dr. Wilk. You're very clear on your memory of some of these events when you refer to your notes, right?
Yes,
And you're very clear, as you sit here under oath, she told you she was in the middle of a divorce, aren't you?
yes,
All right. Lastly, again, you mentioned the irony of 1 year later. From March of 1981 through March of 1982, you are aware that Ms. Durst continued to attend medical school.
yes.
And y'all didn't waive her tuition, did you?
I'm sorry?
She wasn't doing that tuition free for a year, was she?
I don't know what she was doing, but I don't imagine she was doing it tuition free.
I stipulated there was tuition is not waived, if that was all.
Thank you, Dr. Will.
Your examination?
Very briefly, as a medical doctor, do you believe you have the experience to be able to determine Kathie Durst was experiencing symptoms of being on any influence, stimulants such as cocaine versus something else?
I would guess so, yes.
When you say I guess, what do you mean by that?
She seemed to be influenced by what she was saying and her emotional state rather than by any drug-induced change. I don't know what cocaine does to a person, so I have no idea. But it seemed to me that it was all pure fear, pure emotion, pure terror, really.
Thank you.
Additional examination?
No, thank you.
And the witness be excused.
No objection.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Julius. Mr. Balian?
That concludes the testimony of this witness, Your Honor.
All
We do
right.
have, as part of the stipulation and instruction, I guess maybe at the appropriate time, the court would instruct the jury as to the weight they should give these videotape testimonies, which would be the same exact weight as if the witness testified live before the court.
The appropriate time, I will give that
Thank you.
admonition. Are you prepared to call your next witness?
Yes, Detective Leslie Hain, she's on her way down the elevator. Yes, Dr. Leslie Hain, she's on her way down the elevator as
Dr. Leslie Haynes?
Yes.
All right.
Yep.
Please come stand in the witness stand. Please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly state that the testimony you're about to give in the trial shall take before this court shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Please be seated. Please state and spell your first and last name.
Leslie, Leslie, Hain, Hain.
Could you please pull your chair closer to the mic and speak
Yes.
directly into the mic? Thank you.
Actually, pull the mic a little closer to your mouth. With the mask, you really need to talk right into them, like bring it about 6 inches closer to you. Like, talk right into it, and you can slide it. Okay, we'll give that a try, but
Okay.
usually a little closer than that would be better. You can tip it up towards you. Okay. Let's see, that may be sufficient.
She's got more cord now. Would you like me to move it?
Yes, please, Mr. Bailey.
Thank you. There, you try that.
Better?
Okay. Can you hear me, Dr. Hain?
Yes.
Is it Haynes or Hain?
Hain.
Hain. Okay. You have a soft voice, so if you could please just speak loudly into the microphone, that would be wonderful, okay?
Yes.
Are you currently working?
No.
Are you retired?
Yes, sir.
What are you retired from?
I worked as an attending in an emergency room before being retired.
And for how many years were you an attorney, an attending at an ER?
Probably 25.
Okay. When did you start working as a doctor?
I graduated from medical school in 1974,
Okay. When did you retire?
and I retired in 2003.
Okay. And for your entire career, were you an emergency room physician?
No, I was a resident in general surgery and orthopedics and emergency medicine before becoming an attending in emergency medicine.
Okay. And for approximately how many years were you an attending physician in an emergency room?
From 1982 to 2003.
Okay. Where did you work?
I worked at Jacoby Hospital in the Bronx, also known as the Bronx Municipal Hospital Center.
Did you work there your entire career?
I worked there except for 1 year, during which time I worked at St. Joseph's in Paterson, New Jersey.
Okay. And Jacoby Hospital, also known as the Bronx Municipal Hospital, where is that located in relation to the Albert Einstein School of Medicine?
It's essentially across the street from the medical school.
Okay. Is there, in 1982, an ER at the medical school, or is Jacoby the closest ER to the medical school?
No, there was a college hospital at the medical school, but the closest emergency department was at Jacoby Bronx Municipal Hospital Center.
So if somebody were at the medical school and needed emergency services at a hospital, would Jacoby be the closest place?
Yes, sir.
I assume you could walk there from one to the other.
Easily.
Okay. Were you working in Jacoby Hospital in the emergency room as an emergency room physician on January 6th of 1982?
I was a resident in emergency medicine.
What does that mean?
It means I was working all of my shifts in the emergency department, but I was not yet an attending, so there was a supervising attending position most hours in the emergency department.
Okay. What were your duties that particular day in that assignment?
I was assigned to the surgical side of the emergency department.
Okay. And as part of those duties, would you see patients in the ER?
Yes, sir.
On that date, January 6th of 1982, did you treat a patient by the name of Kathleen Durst with a date of birth of June 15th, 1952?
Yes.
Back then in 1982, when an evaluation, an examination was conducted on a patient, was there documentation made?
Yes, sir.
What type of documentation?
I would have completed an emergency department chart.
Okay. And before we go into that, do you have like an independent memory as you sit here right now of treating Kathleen Durst?
No, sir.
Okay. How many patients do you think you've treated over your career? Could you even estimate?
Thousands.
Thousands. And did you sense, were you asked to look at your medical records from that date to refresh your memory on that particular treatment?
Yes, sir.
And did you do that?
I did.
Okay. Now, this documentation that you would make, was it made while the examination was taking place?
Yes.
Your Honor, I have a one-page document. It's a medical record. May I mark this as People's Next in order?
43.
People's 43?
There you go. Yes, 43.
Thank you. All right. So, when a patient first came in, do you see People's 43 there?
Yes, sir.
I'd like you to look at just the top portion of this form. It says chart number, and it has a name, address, date of birth,
Yes.
etc. Who fills out this top portion of the form?
A registration clerk outside of the emergency department.
Okay, and would this be filled out by that clerk in the presence of the patient while they're asking patient questions and checking them into the ER?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And the section under that, it says triage,
Yes.
and there's a separate, it looks like somebody else's handwriting. What is that section for?
That's for the triage nurse to ask the patient why he or she is there and then fill in the response.
Okay, do you recognize the writing in that section?
I don't. I do recognize the name of the registered nurse who took the triage complaint.
Who is that?
That's Georgiana McKinley.
Is that somebody you worked with quite frequently in the ER?
Yes.
Okay. And so the patient would typically come in, they would be checked in by the clerk, they would go to a room, and then a nurse would come in and take a history from them?
Actually, the nurse would take the history from the patient or the complaint from the patient outside of the emergency room. There was a separate area after you'd spoken to the registration clerk where you would have spoken to the triage nurse.
Okay. And this nurse, when she takes the complaint from the patient, would this nurse typically, in your experience, make notes on this form as this history is taken?
Yes.
Okay. So what was the chief complaint here? What?
Chief, the presenting complaint is hit in left side of face, complaining of pressure in the left eye for 5 hours.
Okay. Now, when the nurse is done with the triage, at some point when you come in, then do you do your examination?
The patient was brought into the emergency department and would have been placed in an examining room.
Okay. Eventually, did you see Kathleen Durst?
Yes, sir.
And did you examine her?
I did.
Okay. And did you take a further history?
Yes.
Okay. And do you recognize your writing on the bottom portion of this form? It starts with 29-year-old, and it goes to the bottom of this document.
Yes.
Is this all your writing?
It's all my handwriting.
You recognize it, the writing?
Yes, sir.
And is this are these notes and documentations you made at the time you were evaluating and diagnosing Miss Kathleen Durst on this date, January 6th of 1982?
Yes.
All right. What history did Ms. Durst give you?
I can read my writing.
Please do so.
29-year-old female with history of blunt trauma to the left side of face, patient allegedly slapped with hand, now with feeling of pressure, tightness over the left cheek and eye, no visual complaints.
Okay. So when it says history of blunt trauma to left side of face, what does that word history in layman's term mean?
That means the patient is telling me that this is what had occurred that brought her to the emergency department.
Okay, so Kathie told you she was hit in the left side of her face?
Yes.
Okay. And when it says allegedly slapped with hand, why would you use the term allegedly? What does that indicate?
It means that that's what I'm being told, but I didn't witness it.
Got it. Okay. So did you examine Ms. Durst after you took this history from her?
Yes, sir.
Did you notice any injuries to her face?
The OE below that paragraph means on exam.
Okay. And on exam, what did you notice?
Ecchymosis and mild edema and tenderness over the left infraorbital and zygomatic area. The zygomatic ridge was without defect or step off. The upper left eyelid had ecchymosis and mild edema. EOMI means extraocular movements intact, which means that all of the muscles were able to move the eyes up, down, left, right, and diagonally up and down. PRRLA means pupils were round, reactive to light and accommodation, which means that the eye was receiving information and processing it properly. Fundus benign means that the back of the eye looked normal on fundoscopic exam.
Okay. So let me just ask you in layperson's terms.
Right.
So you indicated ecchymosis and mild edema above the left eye, correct?
Yes, and also over the infraorbital and zygomatic, which would mean the above and below the eye itself, and the zygomatic area is the upper cheek.
Okay. And what does ecchymosis mean?
Ecchymosis means bruising.
Okay, so bruising.
Black and blue.
Black and blue.
Right.
And edema means?
Mild swelling.
All right. So Kathleen Durst had a black and blue and swollen left eye, is this correct?
Around the eye, yes.
Okay. Her eyelid, the portion above her eye, as well as the portion below her eye was bruised, black and blue, right?
Yes.
And swollen, correct?
Yes.
Is it fair to say in layperson's terms, Kathie Durst had a black eye?
Yes.
And Kathleen Durst had given her date of birth of June 15th, 1952, right?
Yes.
And she indicated she lived at 37 Riverside Drive in the city of New York?
Yes.
Who did she list as her next of kin? Did she list her husband?
No, she lists Anne, and the notation is that this is her mother.
Okay. And assuming she was married, was this out of the ordinary to you?
I can't say.
Okay, but she didn't say, hey, the purpose of listing a next of kin is for somebody to call if there's an emergency, right?
Yes.
And she didn't say, hey, here's my injury, and if there's a problem, call my husband, right?
She did not.
She said, hey, here's my history, and if there's a problem, call my mother.
Yes.
Now, this black eye that you saw, based on your background training experience, was this caused by some underlying disease within her body or by some inflicted trauma?
Given the history and the exam, one would assume it was from inflicted trauma.
Okay, well, did you notice any underlying disease within her body which would have caused the black eye in just her left eye?
No, sir.
Okay. In your opinion, was this inflicted upon her by someone or something?
Yes.
Was this injury consistent with being punched in the face or
Yes.
slapped in the face?
Yes.
Have you treated domestic violence victims in your career in the ER?
Yes.
Would you say hundreds of times?
Yes.
Was this injury consistent? I'm not saying if you know personally that it was caused by, but was it consistent in your experience with the type of injury you've seen caused by incidents of domestic violence?
It could have been.
Did the patient, Kathleen Durst, tell you? Well, first of all, before I ask you that, in your experience and training, how recent were these injuries?
The fact that there was bruising noted would indicate that it was probably several hours or longer old.
Okay, well, was this days old or within hours, you think?
Can't tell.
You can't tell. Okay. Did Kathleen tell you she was attending medical school?
She did not.
Did she tell you she was attending medical school across the street?
She did not.
If she had done so or told you that, would you have documented this in your report?
Yes.
And why would you have done that?
Because we had an agreement with the medical school that medical students treated in the emergency department would have their chart record sent to the medical school for their knowledge of the treatment.
Okay. And I forgot to ask you, but do you see your signature on this form on the bottom?
Yes.
Okay, that is your signature for
Yes.
treating on this date. And this form that we've gone over today, People's 43, was this in fact the medical record that was taken on that date in 1982 for the treatment of Kathleen Durst?
Yes.
And was it taken as a business record in the normal course of operations of the ER where you work?
Yes, sir.
And was it, would it be maintained there?
Yes.
And you're familiar with these records?
Yes.
And this is in fact the record?
Yes.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Cross-examination, Mr. DeGuerin.
Hello, Dr. Hain. I'm Dick DeGuerin, and I represent Bob Durst. You've never met him, correct?
No, sir.
Have you seen any of the television programs about this case?
No, sir.
Have you read any articles or magazine articles about this case?
No, sir.
Okay. Is that, if we could have the screen again for prosecution exhibit 43, just put it up there and let's leave it up if we could.
I have it.
Okay. So may I inquire, counsel, that's actually from the computer, that's not from the Elmo, right?
That's the computer. That's the computer.
Okay, that's fine.
We can do the Elmo if you want.
No, that's all right. Thank you. Let's first, it's hard to see on here the actual date that you saw her, but there is a date stamp that's sideways about midway down the page.
Yes.
Can we focus in on that, please? Okay. I believe what I'm reading there says 6 January 02. Well, or actually 82, excuse me. Can you read it that way?
Yes, sir.
All right. But for that date stamp on it, is there any other place on the record where either you or the nurse or the clerk wrote out the actual date, the registration clerk? Is there any other place?
I have to scroll back up to the top. I don't believe so.
Okay.
No.
And as far as you know, who would be responsible for putting that stamp on it?
That would have been stamped by the registration clerk.
Okay, and that would have been done, if in the ordinary course of business, it would have been done on that date?
Yes, sir.
All right, good. So we can take it, although you have no independent recollection without having this record in front of you, although you have no such recollection, that we can assume was the date that you saw Kathleen Durst?
Yes, sir.
All right, good. And I believe you said, and I don't want to misquote you, that you graduated from medical school in what year?
1974.
74, okay. And you, in February or January of 1982, how long had you been practicing medicine?
I'd been a resident. That would have been my 8th year of residency training.
Okay, so residency training is before you're a full-fledged doctor or not?
No, you're a full-fledged physician. You do a year of internship and then years of residency beyond that.
Okay, they've changed that nowadays, haven't they?
No.
Okay. Do they call them first year, second year, third
They
year?
might call interns now first-year residents.
Okay. So basically, you were a new doctor when you saw Kathleen Durst.
I was new in the sense that I was still a resident, but I had completed a full surgical residency, including a chief's year. And during the time of that residency, emergency medicine had become a boarded specialty. And I made the decision to do an additional 2 years of residency training in order to become an emergency medicine physician and to continue in an attending position when I could find a job.
Did you get boarded?
In emergency medicine, yes. In
When?
surgery, probably within a year or two of completing the residency, but without going back and checking, I can't tell you. And I was reboarded during the time I was practicing emergency medicine as an attendant.
Okay, so my question, I guess I didn't put it very well. When you saw Kathie Durst
Yes, sir.
in January of '82, had you been boarded yet?
No.
Okay.
No, sir.
And I don't mean to have this sound derogatory. You are relatively new in your career in January of '82.
In emergency medicine, yes.
Okay, good. Now the triage portion of this record, if we could hone in on that, please. There we go. Can we bring that up a little bit? Okay. Now this is what you said was written by the nurse.
Yes, sir.
And you were familiar with that nurse. I believe you said her name was Georgiana McKinley.
Yes, sir.
In terms of experience in the emergency room in January of 1982, who had more experience, the nurse or you?
The nurse may have been working in the emergency department longer than I had been.
And as a young doctor, you know to rely upon the experience of a nurse that's had more experience, don't you?
I don't think there's a good answer to that.
What, is there a bad answer to it?
Well, I had done 6 years of surgical training, including a chief's year, during which time I operated independently without an attending present. And in terms of evaluating surgical injury or trauma, I probably had more experience than the emergency room triage nurse.
Okay. But at any rate, what she wrote was, it's kind of hard to read, but the first word, is that left or left?
Hit in left side of face, complain of pressure in left eye for 5 hours.
Okay. You were asked on direct examination your opinion about how long before you saw her this had happened, and it says by X 5 hours. We scooted over just a little bit so we can see it, so the jurors can see it. On the right side there, X 5 hours. That to you, that signaled that the complaint was that it had happened about 5 hours earlier.
The discomfort had started 5 hours earlier.
Okay. So now we go back to the date and timestamp. I read it as 13/19, if you can.
Yes.
Is that what it says?
Yes.
And that's military time. That would be 1:19 in the afternoon.
Yes, sir.
So 5 hours earlier would be 5 hours earlier, about 8
Yes.
or 9 o'clock in the morning.
Yes.
Okay. Now, and then we get down to your observations. And once again, you have no recollection of this case.
No, sir.
But what you wrote was 29-year-old female with history of blunt trauma to left side of face, patient alleged, in parentheses, patient allegedly slapped with hand, right?
Yes, sir.
Perhaps inadvertently, but the prosecutor mentioned punched and then quickly said, well, or slapped. She did not say punched, she said slapped.
Yes, sir.
Now, it was on the left side of her face.
Yes.
All right. Did you see any red marks or finger marks or hand mark on the side of her face, the left side of her face?
I don't note that.
You did not make a note of it if you did see it, right?
Yes, sir.
And probably you would have, if there'd been an imprint of a hand, you probably would have noticed that and made a note of it?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And then the next word is hard for me to understand. What does that say?
Following the
Yeah, right after slapped with hand.
now with feeling of pressure, tightness over the left cheek and eye, no visual complaints.
Okay. By no visual complaints, meaning she was not complaining of any effect on her eye.
No effect on her vision.
Vision, okay.
Right.
Okay, and then your next notation is ecchymosis and mild edema and tenderness over the left and then area.
Yes.
I don't want to sound like I'm trying to make this less than what it is, but I don't want it also to sound like more than what it is. As an emergency room physician, You've seen a lot worse trauma inflicted on another person, haven't you?
Yes, sir.
Particularly in what you assume is domestic violence cases. You've seen a lot worse than this, right?
Yes, sir.
And your use of the term mild edema means just that, doesn't it? It was mild in your assessment.
There was mild swelling, yes.
Okay. And if it had been worse than that, you would have written it down.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Then a little bit later down, you said upper left eyelid with ecchymosis and mild edema. Is that describing the same thing that you, same two things that you, or same thing that you saw?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So the mild edema and tenderness and the ecchymosis and mild edema is both describing the same thing.
Yes, sir.
All right. Then your examination included your effort to determine whether there had been more serious injury than the mild edema or the mild swelling by looking into the eyes and seeing how she could move her eyes back and forth and so forth. So you did an objective examination.
Yes, sir.
And you found that there was no difficulty in moving her eye and so forth.
Yes, this is important because the bones that make up the cup that holds the eye are relatively thin, and you want to make sure that there's been no break that would entrap one of the muscles and therefore restrict the eye movements.
And so your examination that you conducted convinced you that there was no more serious injury, right?
Yes, sir.
Otherwise, you would have ordered x-rays.
Yes, sir.
You did not order x-rays, did you?
No, sir.
And if there had been injury to the inside of the eye of some kind, you could have seen that in your examination, right?
Probably.
Meaning, of course, I don't know the name of the instrument that you look into the eye with, but
Yes.
you visualized yourself looking into the eye and you saw no injury to the interior part of the eye.
Yes, sir.
Your diagnosis is contusion left face. Did I read that correctly?
Yes, sir.
And do you have any other independent recollection of what you were told or her mood or anything that you can independently recollect now other than what's in this record?
No, sir.
Your treatment am I reading this correctly? Recovery as indicated?
I can't see that part of the chart.
Oh, would you move it up, please? Sorry.
No, it needs to go down.
No, the other way.
Activity is tolerated.
Okay. So that's activity, not recovery. Activity as tolerated.
Yes, sir.
Reassurance, that is, you reassured her that she was not seriously injured.
I reassured her that the eye doesn't need further care.
And you, I don't know if this is a prescription or not, Tylenol, and would you read the rest of that, please?
Tylenol or aspirin, ASA, is a shorthand for aspirin. 2 tablets by mouth every 4 hours is needed.
Okay, so that's not really a prescription, that's over-the-counter stuff.
Yes, sir.
Did you give her any kind of cream or something for the ecchymosis, the bruise?
No, sir.
Take some notes. Did you prescribe anything other than the over-the-counter Tylenol or aspirin?
No, sir.
Did you schedule a follow-up visit?
No, sir.
Did you see the need to refer her to someone more specialized in the field of injury?
No, sir.
And so, bottom line is, she came in, said she was slapped, she had physical evidence of that, but you've seen much, much worse. Is that fair enough?
Yes, sir.
Thank you, that's all.
In your opinion, would pulling someone by the hair to the extent where a huge chunk of their hair comes out be worse?
My objection is that's...
Sustained.
You, given your surgical residency, as well as the work you've done at that point, did you feel qualified to give the opinion that this woman had a black eye inflicted upon her?
Yes, sir.
Did you have a problem diagnosing that?
No, sir.
Okay. And you indicated that the swelling was mild on the black eye. Assuming this was from a slap, as the patient indicated, how hard of a slap would it have to be to cause a black eye like that?
So, hard.
A hard slap, right?
Yes, sir.
We're not talking about like where a parent would typically slap a child. We're talking about a full swing slap to the face, right?
That's leading.
Sustained.
She can respond to me.
Sustained.
Can you
Yes,
describe
sir.
how hard?
Yes, sir.
How hard?
If it were a simple slap, you'd expect redness, but you wouldn't expect the residual black and blue, the residual swelling.
So we're talking more than a simple slap to the face.
Yes, sir.
And this person was met with this hard slap to the face at approximately 8 in the morning when they woke up, assuming they woke up that time?
If
Objection.
you assume that the timing on the
Objection.
time
Sustained.
is correct.
Sustained.
Okay. You indicated that the swelling was mild and the other things you wrote in your report were mild. Were you trying to say that the domestic violence was mild or just the injury itself was mild?
I'm describing the injury.
Okay. And from your experience with domestic violence victims in all the
What'd you
cases,
say?
Speak up, please, Mr. Bailey.
from your experience with domestic violence victims and all the cases that you've treated, you're not here to say there's such a thing as a mild case of domestic violence, are you?
No, sir.
Objection.
Sustained, stricken.
Okay. I have no further questions.
Mr. DeGuerin.
Briefly, if I could just ask from here. You could have ordered photographs if you thought it necessary, couldn't you?
Yes,
You could have called the police if you thought it necessary, couldn't you?
yes,
But you didn't do either one of those.
no, sir.
Thank you, that's all.
Mr. Bailey, and anything else?
No, thank you. Your
May
Honor.
this witness be excused?
Yes, Your Honor.
You're excused, doctor. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, people may call the next witness.
Janet Fink, Your Honor.
Your Honor, we have a conversation.
You want to do a sidebar?
Yeah, I can do that, please.
Okay, we'll go in.
You're muted.